basically, I think I'm more certain than Zanny that Boris will. I think he's almost certain to win the premiership, because I just think the nature of the audience he has, the electorate he now has to win.
Could you just
which is
explain
Tory
that
party.
for a second for a non-British audience? It's not like the referendum; it's the other extreme.
It's Conservative Party members who tend to be fairly old and
Male.
very male and very pro Brexit.
So it's only
even
about
to the extent.
It's really only about 150,000 people are going to choose
you
the
look
next
at
prime minister.
you look at the polls, and it shows. I think I saw something the other day saying over 50% of them think that a no-deal Brexit is a good idea. So they're definitely at that end of the spectrum, and I think he's more likely to win. And I think he's more likely to win because they also think that he is the man most likely to be able to deal with Farage, who is the guy on UKIP on the right of the Tory party, and also take on Corbyn on the left. And that may be wrong. I think there are lots of reasons why it might be wrong, but that is the way they're thinking. There is, as we'll come back no doubt to later, there's been a recent drama, a domestic drama he's dealing with, but domestic dramas tend to be what he's extremely good at. That will go through. I think Boris becomes Prime Minister. He goes to Brussels. The Europeans hate him enormously. They will give him very little. So therefore, he comes back to Britain. Maybe there's a possibility of a fig leaf compromise that's not related to his domestic drama earlier. But he comes back with something. It won't be very much. And basically, then I think he faces a choice between a general election, which is one option. A second option is a referendum. And I think for either of those, the Europeans might give him a bit more time. So I think probably it gets delayed a little bit beyond that, but then it's probably a choice between an election and a referendum.
Well, let's explain to the audience who've not been reading the British tabloids in the last couple of days about this domestic incident. The police were called to Boris Johnson's girlfriend's house, a flat, on Saturday night or Friday night or whatever. Tell us about that and whether it will or will not make a difference.
Are you really lowering the tone of this conversation? Okay, all right.
It's much more
We're used to that in this country.
So I will answer that. Let me backtrack a bit. Boris Johnson is the overwhelming favourite of this extraordinary selectocrat of 115,000 70-year-old men who are basically, just think about it, it's extraordinary. The future of Britain, at probably the most important time in its post-war history, is going to be decided by 115,000 70-year-old men. It's overwhelmingly men. It's quite bizarre. Anyway, they do particularly like him, and they are absolutely determined that we should leave the European Union. And in a recent poll, they said leaving the European Union was worth it, even if it substantially hurt the economy, even if it broke up the union with Scotland, and even if it destroyed the Tory party. So this is a bunch of zealots.
But not if it allowed Corbyn to become Prime Minister.
But not if it allowed Corbyn. And that then gets to whether Boris becomes Prime Minister. Boris is, I think, certain to become Prime Minister unless he destroys himself. And he is perfectly capable of destroying himself because he is, and John was at university with him and has known him for 30 years. I've known him for 30 years. England is a very small place, as you know. Everybody knows each other.
But explain the red wine on the couch.
Well, I'm going to get to that. So what do we know about Boris? We know that he's shambolic. We know that he's untrustworthy. We know that he has a very loose relationship with the truth. We know that he is completely without any, as far as I can tell, moral fibre whatsoever. He's the ultimate opportunist. But he's also immensely charming, somewhat magnetic, which explains his very colourful social life. He has, I'm not quite sure how many children, but certainly more than he's had with his wife. He is now estranged from his wife of 30 years and has a new partner, Carrie Simmons. And she has actually got his hair cut, made him lose weight, apparently made him do yoga. All of which seems completely implausible. But anyway, he is. The story of last week was that Thursday evening, they were at her house where he's now living in South London, and there was a huge domestic argument such that the neighbours were concerned about her safety, said that they knocked on the door, then proceeded to tape the conversation, or record the conversation, which they then sent to The Guardian, so the world now knows this argument, which would include her shouting, "Get off me, get out of my flat, you're so spoilt, you don't know the value of anything." And so Britain is now in a huge debate about this. He has refused to talk about it. At Hustings on Sunday, he says he just simply refused to answer the question, anything about it. His supporters say it is an outrage that Labour-supporting neighbours, record this and then send it to The Guardian, and that this is a left-wing plot. And the neighbours are actually, if you look them up on Google, they are out of central casting as, left-wing supporters. But there are also serious Conservatives who think that he should have addressed this. And more importantly, sort of while all this is happening and hogging all the headlines, there's another concern about Boris brewing, which is in the last few days, he has said several things about leaving on the October 31st that show either abject ignorance or sort of willful desire to lie. He keeps going on about how we will just carry on trading as usual. It'll be fantastic and marvellous. And actually, it's not possible to do that under GATT rules. And he's been called out by Mark Carney, the Governor of Bank of England, and various people. And that, to me, is a much more worrying. I mean, let him have his colourful personal life. I care less about that. But this does bring out the sort of person that Boris is. And in the last few days, his popularity has gone down. His lead has halved amongst Tory voters. And amongst the electorate at large, Jeremy Hunt is now ahead.
So would it make any difference if Jeremy Hunt somehow is able to be elected?
Jeremy Hunt is unkindly called Theresa in trousers. But Jeremy Hunt is a Remainer who is much more sensible. He's not nearly as sort of magnetic in his appeal. And the question is, the weird thing about Boris, the reason Boris Johnson is so far ahead is that he's got support from both sides of an incredibly divided party. So the hard Brexiteers, the crash out at all costs crowd, think he's their man. He'll crash out, he's there. At the same time, Remainers have flocked to him because they think he's totally capable of coming back from Brussels with, a full stop changed and the font size different on the agreement and saying, here it is, it's completely different, it's marvellous, it's wonderful, fantastic, I've changed everything. And both sides sort of put their hopes in this man who nobody knows what he really